And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and it's time for another deck tech, or deck techs, I guess I should say. You know, I was really struggling with how many deck techs I was going to do from the combined Strixhaven Commander 2021. I could probably do 20 of them. I could do deck techs until Christmas, really, if I wanted to. There is a lot of really good commanders from both sets that I think are interesting build-arounds. I'm going to rein myself in a little, so I'm only doing 8 more. I know saying only seems weird, but I'm doing 8 more, and I'm doing them all in 2 videos, all right? Like I said, I don't want to be doing deck techs forever, so it's going to be 2 more videos for both Strixhaven and C21 combined. I'm going to put 4 decks in each one. I'll keep the more popular ones towards the front. So starting out today with Extus, Oriq Overlord. And Extus was my #1 ranked commander from Strixhaven. I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of ways you can go with it. I mean, the front, obviously you can easily build a deck around that, right? You can build a Mardu recursion type deck around that. For me though, I like the back more. I really like the back and the idea of I'm going to try to cast this Awaken the Blood avatar as much as I can. I thought it was a little more flavorful if they had made that avatar a legendary creature, but it's not, so that means we can put a whole bunch of them in play, and that's the strategy I went with. I went with the strategy of let's try to make as many of those avatar tokens as we can. Every time they're swinging, they're doing 3 damage to each of our opponents, right? So first thing we need to do is we need sack outlets, right? We basically want 3, because 3 creatures that we can sacrifice is going to reduce the cost to just a black and a red. And obviously the best option for that is always going to be tokens, right? So Endrixar and Sengir Autocrat, right? They make lots of little tokens. Endrixar is maybe the best card ever for this kind of thing. If you just want to be making tokens over and over and over again that you can then be sacking. Sengir Autocrat's going to give us 4 creatures total. Nadir, Agent of the Dust Knell, and Carrion, these both are going to be making us lots of tokens. Nadir also likes that we're sacrificing tokens, so he's serving double duty in the deck. He serves double duty in so many decks. You know, again, if you watch my Commander Legends review, I really gushed over him because he's doing so many different things with the +1/+1 counters and the tokens. I thought he was an interesting commander, and he also went on a lot of decks, and I was right. And I really like Carrion. You know, we can even sacrifice our own token to this. One of our avatar tokens, get 3 of those maggot tokens, and then use that to then cast our Awaken the Blood avatar again. Promise of Boon Ray and Elemental Mastery, again, just fantastic token makers. Promise of Boon Ray is going to immediately get us 4 more tokens, right? Elemental Mastery is great. We could just stick it on a creature, and every turn we're creating a whole bunch of tokens. We can even put this on one of our avatar tokens. I mean, we want to be attacking with those though, so I don't know if we really want to be doing that, but we can, because it's going to make us X elemental tokens, where X is that creature's power. So on our avatar, it'll give us the 3 that we kind of want. Even better though if we can stick it on another creature. And then I got Entrapment Maneuver and Requiem Angel. Entrapment Maneuver I really like because we can actually sacrifice our own token, right? This is target player sacrifices an attacking creature. You create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens where X is the creature's toughness. So we can really sacrifice, and I tried to find more effects like this where you sacrifice equal to its toughness. Our avatar tokens have a power of 3 and a toughness of 6, so we can get more tokens, but there really wasn't that many. This was one that worked. We can use this on our opponents, right? This is actually a pretty decent spell. Our opponent sacrifices their giant attacking creature and we get a bunch of tokens. We can also use it on our avatar token, right? We can swing with our avatar token, deal all the damage, and then at the end of combat, we sacrifice it and we get 6 soldier tokens. I think that's pretty good. And Requiem Angel is particularly good because whenever another non-spirit creature token you control dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token flying onto the battlefield, right? So we can sacrifice our tokens. Again, any of our tokens that aren't spirits, and I think this is the only one that makes spirits in the deck, any of our other tokens that we sacrifice are going to get replaced by a spirit token, so that works really well too. Again, we want to crank out as many of these avatar tokens per turn as we can. I got Rootborn Defenses and Song of the World Soul, right? This is a token, so we can populate. We don't have to just cast Awaken the Blood avatar over and over again. we can just populate and make a token copy of it, right? Rootborn Defenses, it's going to protect our team, which we want anyway, and then we populate one of those tokens. Song of the World Soul, man, I mean, it's 6 mana, but whenever you cast a spell, you populate. If we get this guy out, we can really start going to town. And then I have Gared's Belligerence. I thought this one was interesting. You know, there isn't a ton of populate stuff in Mardu, unfortunately. Gared's Belligerence is going to deal X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. Whenever a creature dealt damage this way dies this turn, populate. So you want to kill as many creatures as you can with this. And I thought, we can kill our own creatures, right? We don't have to kill our opponent's creatures. It doesn't say non-token. So if we have, say, our Sengir Autocrat in play and we have those 3 black surf tokens, we can just pay 5 mana, deal 1 damage to each of them. They're all going to die and we get to populate 3 times. So if we have an avatar token in play, we now have 4 avatar tokens in play. And when they all swing, they're all dealing 12 damage to each of our opponents on top of the normal damage they deal, right? So that's sort of the direction I'm going with this deck. I also have Mayhem Devil and Jury Master of the Review. Again, there's just so many ways you can build around this deck. You're going to be sacrificing lots. So these guys are just great in the deck. But the most important part is we got to be getting that Awaken the Blood avatar back, right? It's going to go to our graveyard and we want to get it back. So I got Friction Reclamation and Tortured Existence. 1 mana black enchantments that are just going to sit there. And when Awaken the Blood avatar goes to our graveyard, it's going to be a creature, right? It's going to flip back over to the other side. I really don't see us using the Extus side much at all. I have play tested this deck a few times, haven't used the Extus side at all, but it is a creature. That's the part that we're benefiting from. You know, these 2 cards, Friction Reclamation, Tortured Existence, are just 2 ways that we can repeatedly keep getting our commander out of our graveyard and returning it to our hand. Ideally, I don't want to cast it from the command zone again after the first time. I just want to do it the once and then we just keep getting it out of the graveyard. Grim Harvest and Haunted Crossroads. You know, Haunted Crossroads, we're putting on top of our library, but I mean, that's still pretty good. Pay 1 black mana, put it on top of our library, keep drawing it every turn if we want. I really like Grim Harvest here. There are lots of effects like this. 1 in a black instant, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. There's tons of cards in black that do that. I like this one because it's repeatable, right? It has that recover 2 in a black. Whenever a creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 2 in a black. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Otherwise, exile it. So we do have to use that recover ability right away when a creature of ours dies or it gets exiled, but we can plan around this, right? Where we Grim Harvest, get our Extus out of our graveyard, return it to our hand, then we'll cast our Awaken the Blood avatar. We're sacrificing creatures, so that's going to trigger the recover. We pay 3, return it to our hand, and rinse and repeat. A couple more interesting cards that I threw in the deck. I really liked Offspring's Revenge in the deck. I thought this was a neat fit. You know, if our commander goes to the graveyard, we can just use Offspring's Revenge, and we're going to have lots of other creatures going to the graveyard too, so it's not just for that. But our commander's in the graveyard, we use Offspring's Revenge, it's going to exile it from our graveyard, which obviously means we put it back in the command zone, so that's not ideal. However, we can sacrifice more creatures, right? You can just sacrifice another creature and it'll pay for the commander tax. But then you have Extus in play, and that's sort of the scenario that you kind of want, because these 2 sides do kind of work with each other a little bit. The only problem is you're never going to have them both in play, but with this scenario, we will have them both in play, right? So we're going to have that 1/1 token copy of Extus in play. Then we can cast or Awaken the Blood avatar, right, from the command zone, and it's going to trigger our Extus. We can get a creature out of the graveyard with its ability, and then we can actually start doing that as well. So I think that works really well in the deck. I got Sword of Light and Shadow. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you gain 3 life, and you may return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So again, we just put this on one of our avatar tokens, which we're going to be attacking with all the time anyway. When it connects, we get to return the spell from our graveyard to our hand, right? We're returning our Extus essentially. Same thing. I put Path of Metal in this deck. You know, I've been looking for a deck to put this in for a long time. 2-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste. The important part, though, is whenever you attack with at least 2 creatures that have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, and or Haste, transform it. So all we need is 2 of our avatar tokens, or 1 and something else. We do have other things in this deck with Haste, and it flips. And the flip side is Metzal Tower of Triumph. which is a really fantastic land in Commander. We're going to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Pay a 1 and a red. Metzel Tower of Triumph deals 2 damage to each opponent. That's definitely something we want to be doing in this deck. We're going to be doing it a lot anyway. And then the second ability, 2 and a white, tap, choose a creature at random that attack this turn, destroy that creature. Those are both really fantastic abilities in a Commander game. So I've always wanted to put this card in a Commander deck and try and flip it, and I think it works great in this deck. And then lastly, Chandra's Incinerator, and I don't know if anyone's figured this one out yet. You know, that all that damage we're going to be dealing to our opponents, that non-combat damage that the avatar deals when it attacks, let's take advantage of that, and Chandra's Incinerator is a perfect fit in any Extus deck if you're going to be using that other side anyway. This spell costs less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So the 3 damage that your avatar token deals when it attacks is non-combat damage. Then, whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So every time our avatar attacks, it's going to deal 3 damage to each of our opponents, and then we can hit one of their creatures or planeswalkers for 3 damage as well. If you're using that flip side for Extus, you know, if you're building around Awaken the Blood Avatar at all, Chandra's Incinerator is just an auto-include, I think. But moving on, Hofri Ghostforge. And Hofri, again, I really rated it high. I think I had 4th overall with Strixhaven Commanders. It has a powerful ability, but also there's a lot of things you can be doing with it. I think you could even just play a good stuff creatures deck with Hofri. You put a Mirran Crusader in there, for example, and Mirran Crusader is already a great creature. It dies, comes back as a spirit. Now it's a 3/3, double strike, trample, haste, protection from black and green. So you could even go that route. You could go the more spirit tribal route, and there is some spirits I put in here that I thought just worked really good. Remorseful Cleric and Selfless Spirit. Those are 2 spirits that I probably would put in a lot of decks anyway. You got to have Graveyard Hate. Making your creatures indestructible is always important. And then when we sacrifice them, they're just going to come back and we get to use their effect again. So I think that works really, really well. I got Rootborn Defenses and Anointed Procession. I didn't put as many populate effects in here as I did in the Extus deck, but that theme does work as well. Again, this is why this deck, you can go in so many different directions with it. The direction I decided to go with, though, was a little different. I thought, you know, that ability where it puts the creature back into the graveyard, I thought was very interesting. You don't see that much. And I thought, well, the fact that it goes back to the graveyard and we can use it again, I really like that. But there's not a lot of recursion in red and white, unless you're doing artifacts. Again, when I first saw Hofri, I thought it was similar to Gerard in what it was doing. With a few changes, it could be the commander for my Gerard deck. So I went more that route. I went with, I'm going to play a bunch of artifact creatures, okay, like Burnished Heart or Solemn Simulacrum, right? They come into play, I get the value out of them, then they die, I get the token copies that I can use again, right? And then when they die again, they go back to the graveyard. Then I have Goblin Welder and Goblin Engineer that I can then get them out of the graveyard again, reuse them again and again. We're just going into this whole cycle, and this is the kind of stuff that I love to do. And so I went with a more artifact creature theme. I know that seems weird, but it actually works incredibly, incredibly well. I sort of stole off of the idea from a Tashar deck that I made. I had a Tashar deck for a long time. That was actually my first actual mono white deck. I really loved it. It was a super value deck. The idea was I just have a whole bunch of artifact creatures that I can use to trigger Tashar's ability and also get back with Tashar's ability. And that's all it was. And that was early on when Tashar first came out. And then Tashar, you know, people started figuring out the combos, and then Tashar became a combo deck. And then again, it gets to the situation where now I can't play it anymore because every time I go into a game, everyone just assumes I'm comboing off. And so I ended up taking it apart, sadly. Tashar is in this deck, though, because, again, it just fits with everything we're doing, right? Now, that token that we're getting, right, the spirit token from Hofri, when it dies, it goes back to the graveyard, and we can get it back with Tashar. Because most of the creatures in this deck are 3 CMC or lower. A lot of them are artifact creatures. We have 34 creatures in the deck. That is a lot, and most of them are artifact creatures, ones that we can be reusing. It's just a super value deck, right? And it has cards like Scarecrow and Salvager of Ruin, you know, cards that don't seem really fantastic, but you play your Scarecrow, you sacrifice it to draw a card, right? And this is what I did in my Tashar deck as well. It goes to the graveyard, you get a copy of it with Hofri, you sacrifice that copy, the Scarecrow goes back to the graveyard, and you get it back with Tashar or with Goblin Welder, right? Same with your Salvager of Ruin. You can actually use this as a combo-y type piece with it as well, where you can sacrifice it, get back your Scarecrow, and then play it again, and then you get that copy, the token copy of Salvager of Ruin that you can then sacrifice to use again, and you sort of get into a bit of loops, not really crazy infinite loops, but just really super value-y loops. And man, I have played this deck, and it really is, again, it's very similar to my Tashar deck, where I just get into these super value loops, where I'm getting cards out of my graveyard and playing them again and getting them back. I even put Phyrexian Soulgorger in the deck because I found that I actually needed to sacrifice stuff more than I wanted to. Phyrexian Soulgorger is an 8/8 for 3, but of course it has a cumulative upkeep, sacrifice a creature, which is pretty harsh. It does fit our 3 CMC artifact creatures as well. It can even sacrifice to itself, right? So I play my Phyrexian Soulgorger. On the next turn, I have to sacrifice a creature. I sacrifice Phyrexian Soulgorger. It comes back into play as a 9/9 Trample Haste Spirit. That in itself is pretty darn good. So it fits in the deck really, really well. Really fun, interesting deck. I really, really like Hofri. I think it's going to be one of the more popular commanders in the format in the long run. And this deck is really fun, really interesting, super value-y, doing a lot of things I want to be doing. But moving on. Octavia, Living Thesis. And this is one I thought would be a little more popular. I know it's still early, but I just thought, you know, the uniqueness here of the build around and the uniqueness of the actual card and the flavor, I just think that I thought was super interesting. And although this seems like a very typical, you know, spell slinger type of deck that you would build around, like a Talron, for example, it actually isn't, because casting counter spells on your opponent's turn isn't really going to help you that much. Because the Magecraft here is making a creature base power toughness 8/8 until end of turn, which on your opponent's turn, you know, it can help you. You can use your creature as a blocker, but it's not going to help a lot, right? You mostly want to do that on your turn. And of course, you want to be filling your graveyard with instants and sorceries so that you can cast your Octavia for 2 mana, right? You're never going to want to cast it for 10. I found that was actually a little more difficult. I thought this was going to be an easy build around, and I had to make adjustments a few times. After I play tested it, I realized it does take a little while to get those 8 instants and sorceries in your graveyard. I mean, you don't want to get your Octavia out right away anyway. I mean, yeah, you can, you know, loot the first couple of turns and fill your graveyard really, really quickly, and then get your Octavia really quickly. But then what, though, right? I mean, I think this is a deck that you're going to want to hang back a little. I did decrease the amount of creatures in the deck because I don't think you need that many. Just a few that you can turn into 8/8. And then I increased the amount of instants and sorceries in the deck and the amount of looting. I have Careful Consideration and Compulsive Research, right? Just a lot of draw and discard. I like Careful Consideration because we are probably going to cast it on our main phase, right? We're going to cast it on our turn because we probably want to get Octavia's ability. So we're going to draw 4 cards and discard 2. That's pretty good. Careful Study obviously is fantastic. And Compulsion. Draw 2, discard 2. Perfect. That's what we want to be doing. Compulsion is just a really great card. I think this can go in a lot of decks. Just discard that card you don't want and then draw a card. I mean, that's pretty great. And then you can sacrifice Compulsion to draw a card. Just great value there, I think. And as I said in my spoiler video, you know, let's throw some flashback in here. We don't want to just be pitching a whole bunch of instants and sorceries into our graveyard and then never be able to use them. So Deep Analysis, Scour All Possibilities, I think are great. You know, they're cards that we can throw in our graveyard, cast our Octavia, and then later in the game we can cast them. And then also Cycling, right? Rebuild and Censor I threw in the deck. Cards that we can use, but also we can just cycle them, right? Cycling is another way that we can fill our graveyard with instants and sorceries. I obviously put Talron in the deck. Obviously, I think Octavia fits perfectly in any Talron deck if you already have one. Those 2/2 Flying Drake tokens are now going to be 8/8 flyers. That's going to close out the game pretty quick. And Metallurgic Summonings, again, we're going to make probably little Construct Artifact Creature tokens. We don't have a lot of big expensive spells in here, but then obviously we can turn them into 8/8s, right? Which is a lot more menacing. And that second ability is not too bad either, right? Exile Metallurgic Summonings, return all instants and sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. That's pretty good. We could definitely use that at some point. But we want to have some other creatures that we're turning into 8/8. Cephalid Constable is the obvious one, right? That's the creature that you really want to turn into an 8/8 and smash your opponents with and bounce 8 permanents. That's pretty much going to be game over for most people if you bounce all their lands. Some other cards that I thought fit, Ghostly Pilferer and Wharf Infiltrator. Both of these guys are really hard to block, so we can just get in for 8 damage. Ghostly Pilferer also has that discard outlet that we can use if we need to. Wharf Infiltrator also has a looting ability that we can use, so I thought those both fit really well. I was going to go more putting those 1-drops that are unblockable in the deck. I had about 20 creatures in the deck, and then I thought, you know what, I don't really need it. I need more instants and sorceries, because not only do you have to fill your graveyard, but you have to trigger Octavia's ability. So I took a lot of those creatures out and just put more instants and sorceries in. Really, we only need a couple, and they're going to be good ones. I got Invisible Stalker and Blighted Agent. I mean, Invisible Stalker, Hexproof, and Unblockable. Then we turn it into an 8/8. Blighted Agent, I'm not a big fan of Infect. This is the first time I've ever put an Infect card in one of my decks. But I mean, what can you say? An 8/8 unblockable creature with Infect. Can't go wrong with that. And then I got some man lands, Blinkmoth Nexus and Fairy Conclave. Again, we can just pay 1, turn Blinkmoth Nexus into an 8/8 flyer. That seems pretty good. Fairy Conclave, pay 2 mana, turn it into an 8/8 flyer. And then I got Giga Drowse. I thought this would be an interesting fit in the deck, right? So 1 mana, instant, and it has Replicate 1. And all you do is tap target permanent, that's all. Replicate is whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copies. So remember, Octavia's ability, that Magecraft ability, is whenever you copy an instant or sorcery spell as well. So every time we replicate this, we're going to be copying it. So we can pay 1 blue, like say we do this 5 times, right? We do this 5 times. We're going to be triggering our Octavia 6 times total. That's only 6 mana. We trigger Octavia 6 times. We tap down our opponent's entire team, and we turn our 5 or 6 creatures into 8/8s, that person's just dead, right? This is going to be I pump my whole team and tap down my opponent's team, and they're just dead. I also put Willbreaker in the deck. That ability of Octavia's, we can use it on other people's creatures. And then I got Energy Tap. Man, is this a perfect fit in this deck? We're only going to pay 2 mana for our Octavia, and then we can pay 1 and tap it for 10 mana. That's pretty good. So that is pretty much my Octavia deck. And lastly today, Laelia the Blade Reforged. And Laelia is one that I don't know why, I started building this deck and I realized this is a Voltron deck, and I don't really love Voltron decks, to be quite honest. And I don't love mono red. Red is my least favorite color. So I had an incredible amount of fun building this deck though, despite the fact that it is not even remotely something that I typically do. Just the very interesting, unique cards that can go in this deck. Whenever you exile 1 or more cards from your library and or your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Laelia. So again, we want instances of exiling. We don't want to exile 3 or 4 or 5 cards at once. That's only going to give us 1 counter. What we want is 2 or 3 or 4 things that are going to trigger on our turn that are going to put 4 or 5 counters on Laelia. Like I said in my ranking video, I think Laelia is really underrated because you can easily, she puts a counter on herself every turn when she attacks, and then you can easily put 3 or 4 or 5 more on her every single turn, so she's going to get huge real fast. I'm not even going to go over the obvious stuff. I mean, yeah, you can put Jeska's Will in Valakut Exploration in this deck, obviously. Those are auto-includes in any mono-red deck anyway. They're going to work great in this deck. The more interesting ones, though, I like Bomat Courier and Kyrene Archive. These are cards that are just going to be exiling a card off the top of our library every turn and putting a counter on our Laelia. And also, they both have that effect where you're basically saving those cards, right? We already have a ton of effects that have the impulse draw, right? That's probably where your head goes when you see Laelia is, oh, we're going to do a bunch of impulse draw stuff, right? Like Harnfell Horn of Bounty, which of course is in the deck, but I didn't want to do too much of that because most of those impulse effects are you have to cast it by the end of the turn or it's just gone. I like these 2 cards because they're going to be exiling those cards and then saving them for later. And then at a later date, when our hand is empty, we can refill it with these guys. I got Mystic Forge and Oracle's Vault. I mean, they're both pretty good, right? Mystic Forge can cast stuff from the top of our library, right? If it's an artifact card, and we do have quite a bit of artifacts in this deck, but we can just pay 1 life, exile the top card of our library. If we don't like what's there, also, we can just pay 1 life and put a +1/+1 counter on our commander if we want with this. You know, this is the kind of effects that we want. We want stuff that we're just going to be using every turn, that's giving us value and also putting a counter on our commander. Oracle's Vault also works with the Mystic Forge because we can see what's on top of our library and then exile it to play it. Once we get 3 brick counters on it, we can then use the bottom ability, which of course is fantastic, where we can exile the top card of our library. Until end of turn, we can play it without paying its mana cost. So those work great in the deck. I also got Tectonic Giant. I mean, again, this is just a good card that I think you could probably put in any mono red deck. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, you choose one. And we can exile the top 2 cards of our library and choose one. Until the end of your next turn, you can play it. But again, we have that other option where we can deal 3 damage to each of our opponents, right? If we are getting into a situation where we're exiling lots, again, we're doing a lot of the impulse draw. Maybe we don't want to do that with Tectonic Giant because we already have a bunch of cards in exile that we have to play right away. So we'll skip that and do the 3 damage instead. So I like that option there that we can have. Skyship Weatherlight. Yeah, this one fits great in the deck, and I'm not sure why I didn't mention this in my 10 cards videos. It is another tutor, right? It's a colorless tutor. I probably should have mentioned it. 4 mana legendary artifact. When Skyship Weatherlight enters the battlefield, search your library for any number of artifact and or creature cards and exile them, then shuffle your library. So this is going to put a counter on our Laelia, right? It's exiling cards from our library. It only puts 1, but I just think it's an interesting card that fits in the deck, and it is a tutor, and tutors in mono red aren't very common, right? Then you're going to pay 4, choose a card at random that was exiled with Skyship Weatherlight and put it into your hand. So basically you just pay 4 to put one of those cards in your hand, right? You can just use this to get 1 card. If you really, really want a certain card, you pay 4, go get that card, and then pay 4 more and put that very specific card in your hand. It's 8 mana. That's a lot to tutor one thing, but we are in mono red here, right? Or you can just get a bunch of things that you think will work in the deck. It's only artifacts and creatures though. That's the only stipulation here, but we got a ton of both of those in the deck, so that's not a problem for us. And then of course, Underworld Breach. I mean, yeah, this again, just a really fantastic card that is going to fit in the deck really, really well. There actually isn't a ton of exiling stuff from your graveyard in red. I thought Flashback would be a good direction to go, but that doesn't work, right? Flashback doesn't work with this because Flashback is going to put the spell on the stack and then it's going to exile. So you need something to be directly exiled from the graveyard in order for it to work. So Underworld Breach does work really, really well. I also have Grim Lavamancer and Izzet Chemister. Again, just really great cards, but they're also going to be exiling stuff from our graveyard. So they're going to be putting counters on our commander. I got Relic of Progenitus and Scrabbling Claws. I mean, graveyard hate's not going to be a problem in this deck, right? We're going to have lots of it. Also, we can use it on ourselves, right? We can tap in either of these to exile a card out of our graveyard that we really don't care about. And then also, obviously, we can use it as just how it is intended to hate on our opponent's graveyards. And then I got Phyrexian Grimoire. Again, this is one of the reasons why I had so much fun building this deck, is because I can put funny cards like this in here. So Phyrexian Grimoire is a 3 mana artifact. You pay 4, target opponent chooses one of the top 2 cards in your graveyard, exile that card, and put the other one into your hand. So what this is going to do is this is card advantage and also putting counters on our commander, right? So we're going to pay 4, an opponent chooses 2 cards, and you can do this in a political way, right? You can pick the opponent that maybe you're more friendly with that's going to give you something good, like maybe you need a board wipe or something. But what's going to happen here is you're going to exile one of the cards from your graveyard. That puts a counter on your Laelia. And then you get a card from your graveyard and put it back in your hand. So it's win-win, right? This is a win-win situation, I think. And then I put Squee the Immortal in the deck as well. You can cast Squee the Immortal from your graveyard or from exile. So this is a card that we can just exile from our graveyard and then cast it again, chump with it, goes to our graveyard, exile, right? We can just sort of make sure we have something in our graveyard just in case, you know, our graveyard gets exiled or something. We can have Squee that we can just keep putting on our graveyard and exiling. And then this is sort of a Voltron deck, right? So I put Power Matrix in here. Just thought this was an absolute perfect fit. Our commander is sort of just a big vanilla creature. She does have haste, so that's good. I like that. But +1/+1 and flying, first strike, and trample, that's pretty darn good. Also, finally found a deck to put Commander's Plate in. You know, again, I really, really like this card a lot from Commander Legends because it is benefiting people for playing less colors. However, I don't really play Voltron, so I didn't really have a deck to put it in, but this deck, it's perfect in, right? Our Laelia is going to get +3/+3 and has protection from every color that isn't red, which is super fantastic. I also thought Ketis was a great fit in this deck. I mean, it's in the 99, but it still works. Whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to a player, deals that much damage to each other opponent, that's going to close out the game pretty quick. I also have Kozul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, and Agitator Ant, because I thought we're going to be swinging a lot, so we have to be careful for that swing back. Both of these cards, like Kozul, obviously is a pillow fort type effect in red. Again, it's an effect you don't see in red that much, but it's going to force our opponents to pay 3 or else we get a free blocker essentially, right? And Agitator Ant I really like. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that has counters put on it. So we can put these counters on our Laelia, which is going to be attacking anyway. It's goaded, but so what? We're already attacking with it. So we can beef up our Laelia with this. Also, you know, we're tempting our opponents to do the same, which then they won't be attacking us, right? And then I thought, you know, we got to be protecting our commander, and there's not a lot of ways to do that in mono red. If this was a white deck, I would put Rebuff the Wicked in here for sure. Unfortunately, I can't do that, so I went with Veilstone Amulet, a neat little secret tech of mine. 3 mana artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, creatures you control can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control this turn. So this is a way to protect your creatures, a colorless way to protect your creatures. It can be difficult to use. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to have an instant in your hand ready to go, because what's going to happen is your opponent's going to target your creature, right? They're going to cast a swords or something on your creature, and you're going to respond by casting I don't know, a braid. So you abrade, destroy an artifact, or deal 3 damage to someone's creature. That triggers your Veilstone Amulet, right? Because you're casting a spell. So your creatures are going to get hexproof until end of turn, and their swords is going to fizzle, right? So basically this is I respond. I mean, yeah, you're going to cast spells on your turn. So your Laelia is going to have hexproof on your turn, probably always, which is good, but more so on your opponent's turn is when they're going to be casting spells like that. So if you have this out, it's always good to have, you know, like an abrade or something in your hand just in case. Just a really fantastic build around. I really had fun building this deck. Just some of the really fun, interesting cards that I came across, some of the really fun, interesting ideas I came up with that fit in this deck. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of cards in here that I didn't talk about, but when you look at the deck list, you probably will have to look at some of the cards and then go, oh yeah, that works in the deck, right? It probably won't be super obvious right away why the card is in the deck until you actually think about it, right? But that is it for today. That is 4 deck techs from Strixhaven and Commander 2021. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for tuning in.